Hey folks, Andy Patton here, joined by Rafael Barlowe. Rafael created NBADraftJunkies.com and hosts the Locked On NBA Draft podcast. Without Gonzaga Hoops this week, Rafael and I are going to discuss Chet Holmgren and other Zags who are on the draft radar for 2022, all right here on Locked On Zags. Don't go away.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome to the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Wow, let's try that again. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to take you through another season of Gonzaga Hoops. Today's episode is brought to you by NetSuite. NetSuite is the #1 cloud financial system to power your growth. Head to netsuite.com/lockedonNCAA for special end-of-year financing on the #1 financial system for growing businesses. All right, I am super excited today to be joined by Rafael Barlowe. Rafael is one of the premier NBA draft experts out there. Really excited without a lot of Gonzaga hoops to discuss in the last couple of weeks because of COVID-19. It's kind of a good opportunity to look at how these guys have performed in the first half of the season, particularly those guys who are looking to go into the NBA either this season or potentially in future seasons. Before we talk about the primary player for this conversation, which is, of course, Chet Holmgren, Rafael, I wanted to get your take on just what you think about this draft class in general and kind of if there are any players who have really surprised you or stood out to you or just the depth of the class just as a whole. Obviously, we're still a long ways away from June, but kind of what your thoughts are so far.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a pretty good class. I mean, there's been a few guys that have literally come out of nowhere. Johnny Davis from Wisconsin comes to mind. Even like Keegan Murray, who was arguably their third best player last year. He was in the shadows behind Luka Garza. He's playing so well that he probably projects to be a top 10 pick. So the sophomore class is pretty strong. I think the freshman class is also pretty strong. And then you have the G League Ignite team, which has maybe 4 guys that could end up being selected in the top 30, 35. So overall, I think it's a good class. I mean, I think there's still some question marks.
Yeah.
But I mean, we have question marks with every class. So
of course, yeah.
It's never an absolute.
So I want to talk about Chet Holmgren, of course, the guy who's been lauded as the potential first overall pick in this draft class since he crossed over Steph Curry when he was like 15 years old in high school. Obviously comes over to Gonzaga, has been playing elite on the defensive end of the floor. Hasn't really stood out in a tremendous way offensively, although he's been super efficient. Most of the mock drafts that I'm seeing have him still in that top 5 range, although he's certainly not the consensus #1 overall pick at this point. I'm curious if you think that that's more of Chet maybe not living up to expectations or more of just other guys jumping him, or if you never had him as the top overall pick. I'm curious kind of where you think he is at this point in the season.
Yeah, I can't imagine him falling outside of the top 3.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be pretty crazy. And I actually had him #1 coming into the season, but I am not surprised at how he's playing because I think Drew Timmy is the best player in college basketball. And I assumed Chet knew that coming into the season that he was going to have to play a complementary role. Now, I may be a little bit biased because I live in the Dallas area and I've seen Drew since he was about eighth or ninth grade. So, but yeah, I mean, I just assumed that Chet knew coming in that he was going to have to play a complementary role. The one thing that has been a little bit shocking to me is that he hasn't shot the ball as well from 3. I thought that I'd see a lot of Timmy on the inside and Chet just knocking down open threes. I haven't really seen that. But defensively, he's been as good as advertised. But the thing that I like most about Chet, outside of the fact that he has like this unique combination of size and skills, is he's tough.
Yeah.
He's not afraid to throw his 195-pound frame around. I think that definitely stands out with scouts. But I think right now, and a lot of it's probably just based off of the head-to-head matchup.
Mm-hmm.
but I think that Banchero would probably go number one. There's a lot of talk about Jabari Smith from Auburn possibly going number one. I still have him as number three. Right now, I have Chet as number two, but I had him number one going into the season. I just think that I think it's going to end up coming down to how well he plays in the tournament. I mean, right now with their schedule, there's not a lot of high competition, high level games to be played. So, but I think it's going to boil down to the high plays in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the toughness because I think there's a lot of people who are really waiting for obvious examples of Chet getting pushed around because that was kind of their perception of what was going to happen to him at the college level. And certainly that's unlikely to happen in the WCC. There's a couple big dudes, but not the level that they've played already. But he really didn't get pushed around against some of those bigger players. I know that, they didn't win against Duke, but he didn't, Mark Williams wasn't shoving him around constantly. They didn't have too much trouble down low with Alabama. Like he's proven he can withstand some of that, even with his pretty slight frame. I do wonder about the outside shooting. I think I saw that his percentage from transition three was really good, which is great. I think that's a skill that will translate over into the NBA. But his half court sets, his 3-point shooting was really bad. I think it was under
really
20%. So I know his last couple of games he shot better there. So that would be something for me, at least. That would be a huge thing to see him improve upon in WCC play. I know you mentioned that the best thing he can probably do is play well in the NCAA tournament, but are there any other things between now and then, or even then specifically, that you'd like to see him do that would really help kind of solidify him as the number 2 pick at least, or potentially push him over Banchero for that number 1 spot?
Just outside shooting. I mean, if he can catch fire and finish the season in the mid 30s, then I think it will help out a lot. I mean, I expect Gonzaga to run through the conference, but I think right now it's just the outside shooting is the main thing that I think could help him, get back to at least number 1 on my board.
Yeah. And then the last thing, we've seen some pretty wild comparisons for Chet Holmgren. Some of them that I think are kind of a little bit inaccurate. Like he's not Dirk Nowitzki. I'm not sure where that one comes from. He's probably not Kevin Durant. Certainly he's a much different player on the defensive end of the floor than Kevin Durant. I'm curious if there are any, it doesn't have to be a specific player, but just like the kind of player that you expect him to be at the next level, because I think some of the comparisons are kind of coming all different directions and maybe don't make a lot of sense for what kind of player, at least I've seen him be in a Gonzaga uniform.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there is a comparison. I think that's what makes him such a unique prospect. I mean, we haven't seen 7-footers with skills. I mean, Durant is more of a natural guard.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say Chet is a natural guard, but Chet is a natural rim protector. So he's such a unique prospect. I mean, Porzingis is not a popular name, and a lot of people are down on Porzingis, but he's been pretty good this year. I think Chet is a better rim protector, even though Porzingis has been pretty good, especially earlier in his career. But I think the Porzingis comparisons are probably as close as you can get. The downside of the Porzingis comparisons are the similar body type has led to nagging injuries.
Right.
And so, but even if he does have a Porzingis type career, I mean, I think some people would be disappointed, but I mean, that means he's still a high level NBA starter, number 2 or number 3 option on a really good team.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I just think that the outside shooting is going to have to really come along because I think, I mean, not a lot of post play in the NBA anyway.
Right. Yeah.
But I mean, if he can be a floor spacer, he's such a good ball handler that he's able to like attack closeouts, and that will open things up for him.
I've always liked the Porzingis comparison. I'm glad you brought that one up because some people really don't like it because, like you said, his stock is not going in the right direction right now, and some people are disappointed with how his career has turned out. But there are more similarities there than I think anything else. And obviously, if he can stay healthy, which is He hasn't had issues staying healthy yet, but his frame does lend to some concern there. You could understand. But if he can be a slightly better rim protecting version of Kristaps Porzingis, that would be a great career. Like, I don't think there'd be anything wrong with that. So I'm hopeful that that's kind of the direction that he goes. But it's hard when you've been hearing some of those elite names being thrown around as a comparison for you since you were 15, 16 years old. But I think he's on track to be a really solid NBA player, and I'm excited to see where he ends up going in this draft. I think you're right, top 3, top 5 at worst. But it's hard for me to imagine guys like Smith and Ivy and those guys jumping him unless he just straight up cannot shoot for the rest of the season, which I'm hopeful as a Gonzaga fan and a Chet Holmgren fan is not the case.
Yeah, I mean, excuse me. Yeah. I can't see. I can't see Ivy passing him up at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, me neither. All right, thanks, Rafael, for joining me. We got some other Zags to discuss in the second segment. Before we get there, though, let's talk about NetSuite. This is it, the putt to win the tournament. If you sink it, the championship is yours. But on your backswing, your hat falls over your eyes. Is this how you're running your business? Poor visibility because you're still relying on spreadsheets and outdated finance software? To see the full picture, you need to upgrade to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the #1 cloud financial system out there to power your company's growth. With visibility and control of your finances, inventory, HR needs, planning, budgeting, and more, NetSuite is everything you need to grow as a company, all in one convenient location. 93% of businesses surveyed increased their visibility and control after upgrading to NetSuite. Over 27,000 businesses already use NetSuite, and right now, through the end of the year, NetSuite is offering a one-of-a-kind financing program to those ready to upgrade at netsuite.com/LockedOnNCAA. Head to netsuite.com/LockedOnNCAA for special end-of-year financing on the #1 financial system for growing businesses. All right, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags, still here joined with Rafael Barlowe talking about Gonzaga's players and their potential to be in the NBA. We covered Chet Holmgren in segment 1, talked about the things that he needs to do to remain in that conversation for the #1 or at least #2 overall pick. A couple other freshmen that I want to talk about here in segment 2, guys who certainly are much more questionable, not only on whether they're going to be NBA players, but whether they're going to even leave this season. Both these guys are playing reserve roles for Gonzaga right now behind Andrew Nemhart and Rasir Bolton. That is, of course, Nolan, Hickman, and Hunter Sallis. I want to start with Hickman because he has been the better player so far this season, although he was not quite as highly regarded as a prospect coming in, although they were both top 25 guys by most outlets. Hickman has been really impressive. He's been the backup point guard. He's poised. He's calm. He's doesn't turn the ball over. He's looked good as a shooter, although not super consistent. In Spokane here, we call it pulling a Zach Collins if you leave after your freshman year when you were a backup, because that is what Zach Collins did. I'm curious if you think that's a realistic possibility for Hickman based on how he's played so far.
I do. I think at the minimum, both guys are going to test the waters. I mean, it only makes sense. I mean, it's the system is designed for them to do that and get feedback. And then also I think it has a lot to do with who is coming in the next recruiting class.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, we've seen at other schools, guys who really need to come back, but they understand coming back means you may be in another reserve role behind a highly regarded freshman. So I think Gonzaga is getting to that point where they're getting these highly regarded players that some guys may be squeezed out. But I think the Few has done a good job of getting guys to buy into their role. I mean, it's hard to say that there's a coach that has done a better job than that because I mean, even with like Hickman and Sallis, both guys could have went to other schools and started. They knew coming in that they probably weren't going to be 30-minute guys.
Right.
And I mean, to my knowledge, I mean, there hasn't been any issues. I mean, we've seen some guys already transfer. Like, I mean, there's I don't want to mention his name, but I mean, there's a guy that was, I think, a top 30 recruit, wasn't playing much at his school, and he's already put his name in the portal. Yeah. And so, I mean, I think that both guys knew what to expect coming in. As far as Hickman, I love how you mentioned how he's poised and calm and steady. In my notes, that's the first thing that I noticed that when when I watched this game, I mean, he just
Mhm.
has a different level of maturity to his game. And I mean, he's just doing everything that you would want out of a backup point guard.
Right.
Like, he's coming in, he's running the offense. If I did have a knock on his game, I'd say he's taking too many threes.
Yeah.
He's such a gifted ball handler and shot creator
Mhm.
that I think he settles for too many jump shots.
Mhm.
He doesn't get to the foul line
Yeah.
and or just get to the basket. But other than that, I think that if he, maybe it's the system, maybe it's the role that he's
Yeah.
playing, but he definitely has the ball handling and creativity, and I think the size to be, an NBA player.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good note on Hickman. I think Gonzaga they take the team as a whole takes too many threes. I've been talking about this a lot because they're not a very good 3-point shooting team, and they have two elite post scorers in Timmy and Chet Holmgren, who's not elite around the rim. Well, he is elite around the rim. He just hasn't been used in that capacity all that much. But I do think that Hickman has proven he's really good at getting to the basket, really good at finishing around the rim. And I would love to see him do more of that. And like you said, try to get contact, try to get to the free throw line, produce more points that way. Because I think that would be something that would help him. But at the same time, like when you're trying to go into the NBA, the skill that you have to showcase more than almost any other skill is the ability to knock down threes. And I'm hopeful that we see him hit them at a higher percentage in the conference slate. But again, I don't want to see this team in general taking 25 threes a game when they're playing, teams whose biggest guy is 6'8", because it just doesn't make sense for them to be doing
Right.
that. But yeah, Hickman is a guy who has really impressed me so far this season. And Hunter Sallis, it's not that he hasn't impressed me. He hasn't played as much. He's the fourth guard in this team behind Hickman, so his minutes per game have been lower. But this is a dude who just, oozes potential. He's incredibly athletic. I mean, he's an absolute freak on that on the defensive end of the floor. His athleticism is through the roof. He just hasn't showed. I think he's just raw, to be honest. Like, that's the biggest note that I have, at least on him from watching him, is just kind of rawness. So I believe less that he's going to go to the NBA this year than Hickman potentially, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on him. Certainly he's going to test the water, but if you think he's likely to come back, or what things he may need to work on to reach that potential as a top first round pick.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see him as a first round pick, to be honest with you, just because the sample size is limited. But
Sure.
I mean, I've seen stranger things. We've seen guys. I mean, think of Marvin Williams back in the day was the number 2 pick of the draft, and he didn't start. But no, you know what? Honestly, and I had mentioned that I can be a little bit biased towards Drew Timmy because I live in Texas, but I'm from Omaha, Nebraska. So I've known Hunter. I've known his mom for years, and we actually went to the same church. So I remember him as a little skinny kid with glasses. I want to say maybe a few years back, I was at home, and me and my brothers took some younger kids to go play basketball at like a 24-hour fitness, and Hunter was with us, and
nice.
we were teasing him, calling him Baby Ingram. So because I thought he was, gonna end up being like a Brandon Ingram type player. But I think that he's probably sacrificed the most because he was someone that was high on draft boards. I mean, a few of them coming into the season, and then he's been put into this role where, I mean, I've seen games earlier in the season where he played like 8 minutes. Sometimes he'd get in at the end of the first half. And what I like about Hunter is that, I don't see it in his body language. Like, there's some recruits that are in similar situations. You can see it in their body language when they get subbed out, not necessarily pouting, but you can just see that they're upset. Now, on one hand, if you're a competitor, you're going to be upset. But I think Hunter's done a good job as far as being mature about his role. And maybe he understands, like, next year I have a better opportunity. He's played with energy. So when he gets in, he does have somewhat of an impact by just getting hustle plays and running the floor, and very good cutter. I think for him, I would test the waters also, but I think that he could end up being like his teammate, like Strother, who was forgotten about last year. and he's had a breakout sophomore season. So I think that would be a good example for him. But I would test the waters, see what the feedback is, and then come back and apply it next year.
If he does do that, which is what I expect him to do as well, or at least what I hope he's going to do for his sake, because I think he could definitely improve his draft stock next season. What are things that you'd want to see him do? I'm obviously playing more would be a huge help, but are there specific things on the court you'd want to see him do next season or the rest of this season if he gets an opportunity to really help his draft stock?
Yes, the same as Chet, just kind of, become more of a consistent shooter.
Sure.
Following him throughout high school, he was a guy that had the ball in his hands a lot. He was a good pull-up shooter. And even though that he was a big-time scorer in high school, he wasn't necessarily someone that scored by dominating with a high usage rate. He was able to get points off steals, running the floor in transition, cutting, so on. But this is a lot different role. And so he's not going to have the opportunity to – I'm trying to think the best way to put it. Like if you play a lot of minutes, you can kind of get warmed up and then you can get your shot. If you're like a great pure shooter, you can come off the bench bone dry and knock down some shots. So he's not really going to get a lot of rhythm shots is what I'm trying to say, at least on this year's team. So if he can just knock down open shots and just continue playing hard and showing some defensive impact, then I think that, he can help his draft stock. But
absolutely,
you never know. I mean, they could be blowing teams out in conference, and he could end up getting more minutes. I mean, I don't hope for any injuries, but you never know. There could be a time where, he plays good in the tournament. I mean, sometimes that's all you really need. So,
cool.
So that would be my suggestion.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, a couple more folks to discuss with Rafael in the third segment regarding Gonzaga's many NBA talents. We've only focused on the freshmen so far, but there's a few more guys that we got to talk about. Before we get there, though, let's talk about today's sponsor, Get Upside. Hey, Zags fans, Andy Patton here with an incredible app everyone who buys gas needs to know about, Get Upside. My listeners are making up to 25 cents for every gallon of gas every time they fill up. Just download the free Get Upside app in the App Store or Google Play right now. Use promo code SCORE and get a bonus 25 cents per gallon on your first fill up. That's up to 50 cents cash back. Don't pay full price at the pump anymore. Get cash back using Get Upside. Just download the app for free and use promo code SCORE to get up to 50 cents per gallon cash back on your first tank. Some people who drive a lot are making as much as $200 to $300 a month in cash back, and there's no catch. The cash back gets added right to your account. You can cash out anytime to your bank account, PayPal, or an e-gift card for Amazon and other brands. Just download the free Get Upside app and use promo code SCORE to get 50 cents per gallon cash back on your first tank. Today's episode is also brought to you by BetOnline. Folks, BetOnline is back and better than ever. BetOnline has a new web interface for the start of the NBA and college basketball seasons and features more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline remains your number one spot for all of the basketball and football action this season. Head to our new updated desktop or mobile website to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Just use our promo code LOCKEDON to receive your bonus. From basketball, football, NHL, boxing, and UFC, right to your favorite Vegas casino games, don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all of your favorite sports. All right, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still joined here by Rafael Barlowe, still talking Gonzaga's players and their NBA draft potential for this season and beyond. First 2 segments, we focused on Chet Holmgren and Nolan Hickman and Hunter Sallis, Gonzaga's 3 freshmen, talked about what it looks like for them going into the NBA draft this season, or in some of their cases, potentially coming back and going into the draft later. Now I want to talk about some of Gonzaga's veteran guys. We'll start with the guy that you mentioned that you've seen quite a bit in his career going back to his days in Texas as a high schooler. That's, of course, Drew Timmy, a guy who he's kind of got the Luka Garza syndrome a little bit, where he's a great college player and you kind of know that he could maybe play in the NBA, but that, there's still enough limitations in his game that no matter how well he plays in college, he's probably not going to be a first round pick or anything like that. I'm curious your thoughts on him in general as an NBA prospect and specifically the thing that's starting to creep into Gonzaga's minds is the possibility that he maybe comes back and does the Christian Laettner thing and just becomes like the most hated player in college basketball for a fourth season, as opposed to leaving early, because, you know, the things that he needs to improve upon as an NBA player aren't really happening. I guess I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I watched Drew work out at least 4 or 5 times this summer in Dallas, and he put in a lot of work on his outside shooting and his ball handling. And I mean, it just so far, based off the numbers, hasn't translated. I had mentioned on my podcast, I think that what Drew is going to have to do, at least in my opinion, what he should do is continue to play like he's been playing. But then when he does test the waters or have private workouts, show in those workouts that he can shoot. I wouldn't want him to, you know, break the offense trying to improve his draft stock. So that's what I would do. But it's interesting because his numbers across the board are a little bit down this year. When I was expecting them to go up. I think he averaged like 19 last year. And I knew that with their depth and the talent of the team, that, I mean, it was a possibility, but I'm like, last year's team had 2 guys that were highly regarded too, and he still averaged 19 a game. So I thought he was going to be around 22 a game this year. I think he's at about 16. Even the field goal percentage is down, maybe like 4 or 5 percentage points. And then after the Texas game, I just knew he was poised for a dominant season. I still think that he's in a just a weird situation where does coming back to college again next year help him out? Does it help his draft stock? No. I mean, it would be great for his career. I mean, he, you know, statistically, you know, he put himself in position to be able to, you know, come back and, you know, be the most popular player in the program history. I mean, arguably between but yeah, I just don't know what it is for him, if coming back helps him out, or I mean, does he just go ahead and put himself in a weird position, knowing that there's a chance that he won't get drafted? But then Garza he had a big game last week, and then another. It's kind of like a weird thing going both ways with all of the COVID protocols in the NBA. You have an opportunity of being like a 15th man in the rotation and playing 30 minutes for a week. But then also with the NIL, you know, a guy like Drew, I mean, I'm just speculating here, with his popularity in the area, could probably make more money staying than being a two-way player. So very interesting decision. But I mean, like I said, I don't know how this protocol situation is going to change. I mean, I don't really, you know, it could be the same thing next year. So some teams are going to end up having 25 guys playing minutes. So it's an opportunity. It's not a bad situation where you go to the G League knowing that you could possibly get a call up if you can stay COVID free.
Yeah, it's been interesting. You know, you look at Gonzaga, some of their guys in the NBA. You look at a guy like Killian Tilly, who went undrafted and signed a 2-way contract, and now, you know, he parlayed that into a guaranteed deal. He just signed that recently and was starting for Memphis. He wasn't playing a ton of minutes, but he's been starting, in part because of injuries, in part because he's just been healthy and has been playing well. So there's definitely an avenue to get into the NBA and stick, or at least you know, get guaranteed money, even if you're not necessarily a drafted player, especially now, like you said. But yeah, the NIL thing is an interesting argument, especially for a guy like Drew Timmy, who every single Gonzaga game I've watched, he's been on commercials. Like, you see him, he's a figure in Spokane, certainly a small town that loves him and loves Gonzaga. So he has that opportunity to help make money in a way that, you know, other athletes in all of college basketball's past haven't had that ability to do that. So I just, like you said, I don't think there's not really a way he comes back and improves his draft stock. I don't think that he's just 1 year older and he's not going to, I mean, he'd have to come back and have the greatest season in college basketball history, or come back and shoot 40% from 3, which seems very unlikely. And I think you nailed it. I think if he can continue to play within Gonzaga's offense, he's not going to go out and start bombing threes and disrupting the offense. Or if he does, Mark Few's just going to pull him real quickly. But if he can prove that he can hit those threes in workouts, private workouts, you know, scrimmages with teams, I think there's a possibility that that's enough for teams to draft him. Because, I was watching the Blazers game recently, and I was watching Yusuf Nurkic, who has very good footwork. And I was like, Drew Timmy's footwork is better. But then I watched a play of Nurkic leaning into Clint Capella and just moving him, like physically moving him. And I was like, but I don't think Drew can do that. Like, he may have better footwork, but I don't know that he's strong enough to body some of these really big dudes. And, using Nurk as an example still, he can also step out and hit a mid-range shot or hit an open three. And Drew hasn't proven the ability to do that yet. I think it's something that could probably develop. Gonzaga has a strange history of having some of their big men turn into better outside shooters when they leave Gonzaga. Domantas Sabonis hasn't been a great outside shooter, but wasn't one at all in college. Kelly Olynyk has been better in the NBA. Memphis is really trying to make Brandon Clark better. It hasn't really worked. Rui has been a good three-point shooter when he's been on the court, or a better three-point shooter than he was in college. So I think there's a possibility that this could work with Drew Timme, but until he shows that outside shot, I have a hard time imagining him being more than a two-way guy or a end of the bench type of player in the NBA.
Yeah, Drew is so interesting. I've had so many arguments with people on social media because he kicked Evan Mobley's butt last year.
Yeah.
So Evan Mobley right now looks like the front runner for Rookie of the Year. And then on the other hand, you look at Drew, his touch around the rim is amazing. Like the footwork, those little half hook flip shots. So you would think that it should be an easy progression to being able to extend his range, but he is a inconsistent free throw shooter. I mean, I think he's been around the high 60s, maybe low 70s. So I mean, it's very interesting that he has such great touch, like on the move, with contact, but then he struggles with the free throw line when there's obviously there's nobody defending him, and then he just doesn't shoot enough threes to really, I mean, I guess it's a good thing that he doesn't shoot a lot of threes because the percentages say that he's not a good shooter. But it's very interesting because, like the guys that you mentioned, I can make a case to say I felt like Drew has better touch than those guys, especially around the rim. So he's definitely one of the most divisive prospects in this whole NBA draft space.
Absolutely. Well, Rafael, I could probably talk to you about every other player on Gonzaga's roster, but we don't have a ton of time for that. So I've got one more guy that I want to talk to you about. It's Andrew Nemhart, Gonzaga's point guard. Obviously a guy who has had NBA aspirations for his entire career. It was known when he went to Florida that he was hoping to be a one and done. That didn't come together. He ended up transferring from Florida, tested the water after his second year, came to Gonzaga, is now in his fourth collegiate season. He's a guy who at times has looked like the best point guard in the country, particularly for anybody who watched that UCLA game. He was incredible in that game, but at times he has looked nowhere close to the best point guard in the country, I guess is the most polite way to put it. We've seen him be a little bit more careless with the basketball at times. And then most notably, the kind of the story of a lot of the players we've talked about today is the outside shooting. He's just at no point in his collegiate career has he been more than a average three-point shooter. Most of the time he's been a little bit below that, but a guy who also is a gifted passer, has improved defensively, has a lot of that poise as well. I'm curious kind of what your thoughts are for this guy and his potential NBA career.
Yeah, I like him. I thought he was going to have a breakout season, and the numbers have declined. I think he's at his worst field goal percentage in his 4-year career. 3-point percentage just hasn't come along. I think his best year from three was as a freshman. I don't know the volume of attempts, but he's someone that no matter what in the college level, I think you can pencil him in for like 9 points and 5 assists per night. But yeah, just this season was, I felt like the season to where if he could just knock down open shots, shoot 37% from three, then, I think it would have solidified him as at least a second round pick. He has the size. He's a gifted passer. Just offensively, he just hasn't made the strides over the last, 3 years that we've expected. So I think that's going to have a negative impact on his draft status. But I like him. I thought at best he could be a backup point guard in the NBA because you don't really see guys at 6'5" with that type of court vision and passing instincts. But in the NBA, you can't really unlock your passing skills unless you're a threat to score.
Yep.
And so I think that that's going to have a negative effect on them.
Absolutely. Rafael, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day. I know we had a pretty significant time difference between where you are and where I am, and I'm glad we made it work so we were able to chat here about a couple of Gonzaga players. I really appreciate you taking that time.
Oh, yeah, no problem. Actually, let your audience know what time it is where you're at.
It is. Rafael and I started recording at about 6:30 a.m. Pacific time. So I finished recording last night around 8 p.m. and jumped back on again this morning to get this thing done. But it's well worth it to hear your expertise on these guys.
Thank you. Anytime. I mean, that just shows your dedication to this podcast and how much you enjoy doing it. If you're getting up at 6:30, I mean, some people at that time, they can't even function without their coffee, yet alone want to do a podcast. So thank you for the opportunity to come on anytime you want me on as a guest. Just a text away, and I definitely want to have you on as a guest as we get closer to the draft, because nobody's going to have more insight on the Bulldog players than you. So thanks again for the opportunity.
Yeah, man, I appreciate that. Thank you. All right, that is going to do it for today. We got one more episode this week on Friday before hopefully we get to a real Gonzaga game on Saturday. We will see. As of right now, they have not announced if that game is going to be played or not. All of that right here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Thank you again for making this show your first listen of the day. Now is a great time to make your second listen of the day, the Locked On Bets podcast. Locked On Bets is your daily one-stop shop for all of your gambling needs. Locked On Bets is hosted by your boy Q with expert analysis and insight from Lee Sterling. All right, thank you all for listening, and go Zags.